You're not family anymore, Meredith. You're just an employee. And employees can be replaced. My father said those words to me while his new wife Colleen stood behind him, smiling like she had just won the lottery. After 19 years of sacrifice, after building his company from a struggling warehouse operation into a $47 million logistics empire, I was being discarded like yesterday's garbage, one day before my pension vested. But what my father didn't realize was that replacing me meant losing the only person who knew where all the bodies were buried. And in 6 months, the IRS would come digging. My name is Meredith Dawson, and I was born into the family business. Dawson Logistics started in 1987 as a single truck and a dream. My father, Frank Dawson, had taken out a second mortgage on our house in Columbus, Ohio, to buy that truck, a rusted Freightliner with 200,000 miles on the odometer and an engine that coughed like a lifelong smoker. I remember sitting in the passenger seat when I was 7 years old, helping him navigate to delivery addresses with a paper map because we couldn't afford GPS. I remember eating gas station sandwiches for dinner because every dollar went back into the business. I remember my mother working double shifts at the hospital to keep the lights on while Dad chased his dream. By the time I graduated high school, Dawson Logistics had grown to 15 trucks. By the time I finished my accounting degree at Ohio State, we had 50. And by the time I turned 25, my father made me the chief financial officer of a company worth $12 million. You're the only one I trust with the money, Mary, he told me on my first day in the corner office. You've been with me since the beginning. You know this company better than anyone. I believed him. I believed that blood meant something, that loyalty would be rewarded, that the sacrifices I made would one day pay off. I was so incredibly naive. For 19 years, I gave everything to Dawson Logistics. I worked 70-hour weeks without complaint. I skipped vacations, missed weddings, and spent countless holidays reviewing spreadsheets instead of opening presents. I turned down job offers from competitors that would have doubled my salary because my father said we needed to keep it in the family. I never married. I never had children. The company was my family. The company was my life. And I was good at my job, better than good. I implemented systems that saved us $2 million annually in operating costs. I negotiated contracts with vendors that gave us exclusive rates. I managed our relationships with banks and investors, personally securing the $15 million loan that allowed us to expand into 3 new states. Most importantly, I kept the books. In any company, the CFO knows everything. Every transaction, every expense, every decision that involves money flows through my office. I knew which drivers were padding their fuel receipts. I knew which managers were approving overtime they shouldn't. I knew about the consulting fees my father paid to politicians who helped expedite our permits. I knew about the Shell company in Delaware. I knew about the unreported cash payments to certain contractors. I knew about the creative accounting that made our profit margins look 30% higher than they actually were. Did I approve of these practices? No. Did I report them? Also no. Because my father assured me it was just how business is done and promised that one day, when I took over the company, I could clean everything up. That was the carrot he dangled in front of me for 2 decades. One day, Mary, all of this will be yours. Just be patient. I was patient. I was loyal. I was a fool. Everything changed when my mother died. She passed away 3 years ago after a long battle with breast cancer. I was at her bedside, holding her hand, when she took her last breath. My father was in Las Vegas at a logistics conference. He made it back in time for the funeral, but barely. And 3 months later, he was dating Colleen. Colleen was 42 years old, 15 years younger than my father and only 8 years older than me. She had been working as a hostess at a steakhouse in downtown Columbus when they met. Within 6 months, she had moved into my childhood home. Within a year, she had redecorated it from top to bottom, erasing every trace of my mother's existence. Your father deserves to be happy, she told me once, when I commented on the new furniture. Your mother would have wanted him to move on. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. But Colleen wasn't the real problem. The real problem was Bradley. Bradley was Colleen's son from her first marriage, a 28-year-old with a business degree from a for-profit college and a resume full of jobs he'd been fired from. He had worked at a car dealership, fired for falsifying sales records, an insurance company, fired for not meeting quotas, and a real estate agency, fired for reasons that were never fully explained. He was arrogant, entitled, and absolutely convinced that he was destined for greatness. When my father announced that Bradley would be joining Dawson Logistics as a management trainee, I knew exactly where this was heading. I just didn't know how fast we would get there. The day my father fired me started like any other Tuesday. I arrived at the office at 6:30 a.m., the same time I had arrived every day for 19 years. I made coffee in the break room, reviewed the overnight reports, and prepared for our weekly management meeting. Everything was normal. Everything was routine. At 9:47 a.m., my father's assistant called my extension. "Meredith, your father wants to see you in his office. He says it's urgent." I walked down the hallway without any sense of dread. My father and I had meetings all the time. We were family. We were partners. What could possibly be wrong? When I opened his door, I saw Colleen sitting on the leather couch by the window. Bradley was standing behind my father's desk, looking at me with a smirk I wanted to slap off his face. And my father couldn't even look me in the eye. "Sit down, Meredith," he said. I sat. "I'm going to get straight to the point. We're making some changes to the leadership structure. Bradley has been learning the business for the past 8 months, and I think he's ready to take on more responsibility." My heart started beating faster. "What kind of responsibility?" "Your responsibility." He finally looked at me, and his eyes were cold. "We're eliminating the CFO position. Bradley will be absorbing your duties as part of his new role as Chief Operating Officer." I couldn't breathe. "Dad, you can't be serious. Bradley has been here for 8 months. I've been here for 19 years. 19 years and 364 days, actually," Colleen said from the couch. We checked. That's when I understood. My pension was scheduled to vest at the 20-year mark, a benefit that would guarantee me $1.8 million in retirement funds. By firing me one day before that milestone, they were saving the company $1.8 million. And they were giving my job to a man who couldn't tell the difference between a balance sheet and a bed sheet. "Dad," I said, my voice trembling. "Please. I've given my entire life to this company. I've sacrificed everything. I'm your daughter." My father's jaw tightened. "You're not family anymore, Meredith. You're just an employee. And employees can be replaced." Colleen smiled. Bradley laughed. And something inside me went very, very quiet. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I had read enough wrongful termination cases to know that anything I said could be used against me later. So I simply nodded, stood up, and asked one question. "How long do I have to clean out my desk?" My father seemed surprised by my composure. "End of the day," he said. "Security will escort you out at 5. "I understand." I walked back to my office in a daze. 19 years of memories surrounded me, photos on the walls, awards on the shelves, the coffee mug my mother had given me that said, "World's Best Number Cruncher." All of it was about to become someone else's property. But as I stood there, looking at the life I was about to lose, my eyes landed on something else. My personal USB drive. It was sitting in my desk drawer, right where it always was. I had started keeping it 3 years ago, right after my mother died, right after I started noticing irregularities in the books that my father asked me to ignore. I never thought I would need it. I never wanted to need it. But I had learned long ago that loyalty is a one-way street in the Dawson family. And now I had insurance. I unplugged my computer, packed my personal items into a single cardboard box, and slipped the USB drive into my purse. When security arrived at 5 o'clock, I smiled at them, thanked them for their service over the years, and walked out of Dawson Logistics without looking back. The first 3 months after my firing were the hardest. I filed for unemployment, which my father contested. I applied for jobs, but word had spread through the industry that I had been let go for cause, a lie my father told to prevent competitors from hiring me. I burned through my savings, sold my car, and moved into a small apartment on the east side of Columbus. Some nights, I would lie awake wondering if I should just use what I knew. I had evidence of tax fraud, unreported income, and falsified financial statements. I could destroy my father's company with a single phone call. But I didn't make that call. Not yet. Because I wanted to see what would happen when Bradley tried to do my job. It didn't take long for the chaos to begin. Without me managing the finances, Dawson Logistics started hemorrhaging money. Bradley didn't understand cash flow, so he approved purchases the company couldn't afford. He didn't understand accounts receivable, so invoices went uncollected for months. He didn't understand tax obligations, so quarterly payments were missed. But the real disaster was the shell company. For years, my father had been funneling money through a Delaware LLC to reduce his tax burden. It was illegal, obviously, but I had managed it carefully, creating paper trails that could withstand casual scrutiny, timing transactions to avoid red flags, keeping the numbers just believable enough. Bradley didn't know any of this. When he found the shell company accounts, he thought it was free money. He started writing checks from that account for personal expenses, a new BMW, a vacation to the Bahamas, a $40,000 engagement ring for his girlfriend. He created a trail of fraud so obvious that a first-year accounting student could have spotted it. And 6 months after my termination, the IRS came knocking. I was eating ramen noodles in my apartment when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a Washington, D.C. area code. I answered, expecting a telemarketer. Instead, I heard a voice that changed everything. "Ms. Dawson?" This is Special Agent Patricia Holloway with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. We'd like to speak with you about Dawson Logistics. I set down my fork. What would you like to know? Everything. The meeting took place in a federal building in downtown Columbus. Agent Holloway was a stern woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She sat across from me in a windowless conference room, flanked by 2 junior agents and a stack of documents 6 inches thick. Ms. Dawson, she began, we've been investigating Dawson Logistics for suspected tax evasion. Our forensic accountants have identified significant irregularities in the company's financial records, but we're having difficulty understanding the full scope of the fraud. The current CFO has been uncooperative. I almost laughed. The current CFO is a 28-year-old who thinks EBITDA is a type of pasta. Agent Holloway didn't smile, but I saw something flicker in her eyes. We're aware of Mr. Bradley Simmons' qualifications. Or lack thereof. That's why we're here. She slid a document across the table. This is a cooperation agreement. If you provide us with information that leads to successful prosecution of tax crimes at Dawson Logistics, you'll be eligible for whistleblower protection and a percentage of any recovered funds. I looked at the document. Then I looked at Agent Holloway. I have a few conditions. Name them. First, I want immunity from prosecution. I was following my father's orders, but I was still involved in the fraud. I won't testify if I'm going to prison. She nodded. We anticipated that. Immunity is included in the agreement. Second, I want my pension. All $1.8 million of it. My father fired me one day before it vested specifically to avoid paying it. That's wage theft. Agent Holloway made a note. We can include pension recovery as part of any settlement. Third, and this is non-negotiable, I want to be there when you arrest him. She looked at me for a long moment. That's unusual. My father told me I wasn't family anymore. I want him to look me in the eye when he realizes what that cost him. Agent Holloway leaned back in her chair. For the first time, she smiled. Ms. Dawson, I think we're going to get along just fine. The investigation took 14 months. I spent hundreds of hours in that federal building, walking agents through every shell company, every falsified invoice, every unreported cash payment. My USB drive contained 5 years of backup files, everything my father thought he had deleted, everything Bradley never knew existed. The forensic accountants were stunned by the scope of the fraud. Over a 15-year period, Dawson Logistics had evaded approximately $11.3 million in federal taxes. My father had hidden assets in offshore accounts, created fictitious employees to inflate payroll expenses, and bribed local officials to overlook zoning violations. And Bradley? Bradley had made everything worse. His 8 months as CFO had added another $2.1 million in fraudulent transactions, all of them easily traceable, all of them tied directly to personal expenses. When the arrest warrants were finally issued, I was ready. The raid happened on a Tuesday morning, exactly 2 years after I had been fired. I rode in the back of an unmarked federal vehicle, watching through tinted windows as a convoy of IRS agents and FBI officers descended on Dawson Logistics. They came with warrants, evidence bags, and handcuffs. I stepped out of the car just as my father was being led through the front door. He looked older than I remembered, grayer, smaller, like the weight of his crimes had been physically pressing him down. When he saw me standing there, flanked by federal agents, his face went white. Meredith? He sounded confused, like he couldn't process what he was seeing. What are you doing here? I walked toward him slowly, savoring every step. I'm here to answer questions, Dad. Remember? I'm the one who kept the books. Understanding dawned in his eyes, and with it, horror. You did this, he whispered. You destroyed everything I built. No, Dad. You destroyed everything. I just told the truth. Colleen was led out next, her mascara running down her face, her designer clothes rumpled from the search. Bradley came last, still in his pajamas, screaming about his rights and demanding to call his lawyer. I watched them all get loaded into separate vehicles. I watched the company I had built being dismantled by federal agents. And I felt nothing but peace. The trials lasted 8 months. My father was convicted of tax evasion, fraud, and money laundering. He was sentenced to 9 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $14.7 million in restitution and penalties. His assets were seized, including the house my mother and I had once called home. Bradley was convicted of fraud and embezzlement. He received 4 years and a permanent record that would follow him forever. Colleen was convicted of conspiracy and money laundering for her role in helping hide assets. She received 3 years and lost everything she had married my father to gain. As for me? I received my pension, all $1.8 million of it, plus interest. I also received a whistleblower award of $2.3 million, representing 20% of the recovered tax funds. After legal fees, I walked away with just over $3.5 million. But the money wasn't why I did it. I visited my father in prison once, 6 months after his conviction. He looked terrible, thin, pale, defeated. The man who had once commanded a $47 million empire was wearing an orange jumpsuit and sitting across from me in a room that smelled like disinfectant and regret. "Why?" he asked. "After everything I did for you, why would you destroy me?" I stared at him, this man who had raised me, who had taught me everything I knew about business, who had thrown me away like garbage for a woman he'd known for 18 months and a stepson who couldn't balance a checkbook. "You didn't do anything for me, Dad. I did everything for you. For 19 years and 364 days, I gave you my life. And you repaid me by telling me I wasn't family anymore." I was angry. "I didn't mean. You meant every word. And so did I, when I told the IRS everything." I stood up. "You taught me that loyalty means nothing in business. You taught me that family can be replaced. You taught me that the only person I can count on is myself." I looked down at him, and I felt the last thread of love I had for my father finally snap. "Thank you for the lesson, Dad. I'll never forget it." I walked out of that prison and never looked back. 3 years have passed since the trial. I used part of my settlement to start a consulting firm that helps small businesses implement ethical financial practices. I named it after my mother, Patricia Dawson Financial Services. We now have 12 employees and clients across 6 states. I also created a scholarship fund for first-generation college students studying accounting. Every year, I give 2 students full rides to Ohio State, the same school where I earned my degree. I want them to know that integrity matters, that doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. I'm dating again, something I never had time for when I was married to my father's company. His name is Daniel, he's a high school history teacher, and he has absolutely nothing to do with logistics. We're taking things slow, but for the first time in my life, I'm putting myself first. As for my father, I hear he's up for parole next year. I also hear that Colleen filed for divorce the moment he was convicted. She's apparently dating a real estate developer now. Some people never learn. Bradley got out of prison last month. He's living with his birth father in Florida, working at a car wash. I hope he's learned something, but I doubt it. People sometimes ask me if I regret what I did. If I feel guilty for sending my own father to prison. The answer is no. I didn't send my father to prison. His choices did. His greed did. His decision to value a new wife and her useless son over his own daughter did. I spent 19 years believing that loyalty would be rewarded, that sacrifice would be recognized, that family meant something. I learned the hard way that some people will use you until you have nothing left to give, and then discard you without a second thought. But I also learned something else. I learned that the quiet one, the loyal one, the one who keeps the books and never complains, she's the one with all the power. She just has to be brave enough to use it. My father thought he could replace me. He thought Bradley could do what I did. He thought 19 years of knowledge and expertise could be transferred in 8 months to a man who didn't know the difference between revenue and profit. He forgot the first rule of business: never betray the person who knows where all the bodies are buried. Because one day, she might start digging. The end. Lesson from this story. Loyalty without boundaries is just exploitation with a family name. Never sacrifice so much of yourself that you have nothing left when they decide you're irreplaceable, because the person who keeps the books always has the final word.